and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to talk to people about their stories. Where did they come from? How did they get here? And this is a story I think you're going to really enjoy. The way we found out one another, she called Better Life TV and said, I have a story I'd like to tell. Welcome, Eloise. And your last name is Despain. Mm-hmm. Now, when I wrote it, I had a lowercase d and a capital Spain.
No, part of the family does it that way, but my husband's family spelled it all one word.
And his name is?
Marwin, M-A-R-W-I-N.
Where do you and Marwin live?
We live in the county, Josephine County. Our youngest child used to say, Mom, what town do we live in? And I'd say we don't live in a town, we live in the county because we're in by a quarter of a mile in Medford School District. We get Central Point Mail and we have a White City phone. So we live almost in White City, but we're out in the country.
Oh my. Well, then you tell me a lot of Camp White history and all that sort of stuff. But first, let's start with you as a little girl.
Okay.
Where?
My dad came from Minnesota and my mom came from Salt Lake City when they were young.
Now,
and they
these
married.
are them.
That's my parents.
What a gorgeous dress.
Yes, Florence and Waldo Melke. My dad's name was Waldo Melke. It's German. He said nobody in the world ever had his name.
And your mother's dress?
She made her dress.
All those ruffles and all those, oh, it's gorgeous. Where were they married?
They were married in her parents' house in Lawndale, California.
Well, now your roots go back to California like so many of us.
Yeah, my dad decided in 1940, the end of 1940, that the America was trying to get ready for a war because we're sure we would be drug into it. It was already going in Europe. And so they were building army camps everywhere. And so my dad decided he'd give up his contracting business and move up and work on Camp Roberts.
Now this is Camp Roberts.
This is Camp Roberts. It's near San Luis Obispo, but there's a little town a little ways away called San Miguel, and that's where we lived. And he couldn't find any place to rent because of the camp and all the people that were coming in. And so he found this house down in a canyon, like 2 miles from San Miguel, and it was just all grass and big hills and brush. And you had to go down in this canyon, and the house had no indoor plumbing, no indoor water, anything. My mom, being a city person her whole life, and she had my brother and I, who I was in first grade and he was 4, and she had a brand new baby.
Now that's the brand new baby in
that's
this.
A few months after she was born.
With the bucket for the water. Oh my goodness.
And so, but she did really well. She just did really well. And I had to climb up out of that canyon to go to school by myself. I had to walk up that rocky little road, cross this little creek, and the school bus was really a 1938 Ford that the janitor owned. And he would drive around to the farms and the ranches back in the hills and get the kids. And I think there was only 5 of us. And we went in up on the prairie. There was this school that had 2 rooms with a bell tower on top you pulled with a rope. And the first day I was there, I was real little for my age, and my mom would make me curls brushed around her finger, you know, and I had long curls, and I was real little. And so all the kids were standing around the janitor in the hall saying, let me, let me, let me, let me. And he said, no, we're gonna let Eloise, she's new. And so I grabbed a hold of that rope and pulled it, and I went up off of the ground, off of the floor, about 6 feet off of the floor, it seemed to me, and up and down and up and down, and I didn't cry, but I was really scared.
Oh, I would be too. That's a fun.
And now the kids were just delighted because I was doing that, and then they took me up higher than it did them because some of them were big. There was 4 grades in one room and 4 grades in the other room, so some of them were 6th and 8th graders, and they thought that was hilarious because I had to lift my feet up. And then another thing I remember there was it rained a lot.
I didn't know that.
And it was so dry, I don't know why, but because it was gravelly dirt, it would make big puddles and make water stand everywhere, and the little creek that was only like this wide beside our house would get like twice that big and wash out the boards that we drove on to get out of the canyon. My grandfather and my dad always have to keep putting them back. And one day I was in the swing at recess, and I had a brand new coat. My mom always made pinafores, from organdy pinafores for me to put over my dresses. She'd done that in kindergarten also. Anyway, I was swinging in the swing, and they were made out of ropes and a board and big poles like they used to make swings. That's not metal and
Right.
plastic like now. And these two girls came, and to me they seemed very big girls, but I don't know how big they were, but they came and said, "Can we push you?" And I went, "Yeah." So one got in front and one got in back, and they pushed me really, really hard, and I fell out in that big puddle that was under the swing.
Pinafore and all.
And I just went plop. And so they felt so bad, and they walked me into the teacher. And the teacher took me in the closet and took off my coat and my dress and my petticoat, and then put my coat back on and put my petticoat and my dress over the heater. And then took me to my seat, and I had to sit in class as a little first grader with just my coat on and my clothes over there on the heater, and all the kids snickered at me. I didn't cry, but I was very embarrassed. Anyway, and then she was nice, and when they got dry, then she took me back in the closet and put them back on.
And you remember these stories? What have you done with the... Well, I've got books and books and books here, folks, because not only can she tell a story, but you write them.
Yeah, I love to write.
And
I've typed them up.
And put pictures in them.
And I put pictures. I thought they came out quite well because they're black and white pictures. And I just took them, put them on with Scotch tape on empty pages between, and then when I went down and had them printed up, and I thought they came out quite well.
Now, you did this all yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them are bound this way.
Yeah, you can take them down to Office Depot or somewhere, and they'll bind them.
Sure, and this one's with the rings.
When I took this one of my father's history, just a year or so ago, they weren't doing that anymore. They were doing it this way.
Oh, well, we're going to take a look at some of these. This story fascinated me, so why don't you tell us?
Well, my father was a building contractor, and
he was a building contractor in California.
yeah, and then I'll tell the next part first. Then we went, when Camp Roberts was finished, then he said, "I heard that they're building a camp up in Oregon." And my mom said, "Okay." She's always really game. And so they came up to Medford. I remember when I was a little kid hearing that we were moving to Medford and hearing, "I wonder what that looks like." I could see these huge, huge, tall mountains, and these metal bridges. I didn't know what Oregon looked like. Anyway, and so we went to Oregon, and he worked on Camp White. Oh, I missed one story in the other place first, and then we'll do that. When we lived in the little house in the canyon with no electricity and no water, and you had to haul everything, my dad put up a Christmas tree at Christmas time, and my mom didn't have any decorations with her because they hadn't moved everything from LA. And so she had us making the little wreaths and everything the kids make. And then she made gingerbread boys and girls and tied them on the Christmas tree with red yarn. And then she put candles on them from the general store, and she would light them with my brother and I sitting on the couch. And we could only sit there about 10 minutes, and then she'd blow all the candles out. She was afraid she was going to have a fire. And then one night we were asleep, and it was always steamy in the house because she had to boil water on the wood stove for everything. And one night we heard plop, 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 and it made me scared, and I snuggled right down in the bed next to my brother. And my mom said, I heard my mom in the bedroom saying to my dad, "What is that noise?" And he said, "Let me think a minute. I think it's your cookies." So they got a match and lit the coal oil lantern and went in there to look, and the cookies were dropping off of the Christmas tree because they got damp. The string was cutting through them. And so my mom said, "Well, I guess we'll have to eat them so they won't pop and scare us anymore." Anyway, I missed that story. But anyway,
What a wonderful breakfast of gingerbread cookies.
Yeah, and then we went to, moved to Oregon, and my dad was a foreman out on Camp White. And the first year we lived in
you went from one military base to
another one.
So it's kind of a camp follower, but at a different time.
Yeah, he did that. He liked it, and he was always a foreman and big deal to him. So we rented a house for a year, and they bought some property. They had an old black Buick. I don't know, it was a 30-something, and that we'd come up here in. And he traded that to a guy for a down payment on this 15 acres up on the old stage road, and that's how we got the property.
Now,
and then
when
he
you're-
built a house.
When you're talking Old Stage Road, that really was where the stagecoach went.
Yeah.
That
Across
from
the road.
Jacksonville,
Yeah, across
Oregon.
We were just barely north of Beale Lane, where Beale Lane comes into the old stage road above Central Point. But down the road, I think the second neighbor down across the road, on their lawn, there was a big monument that told that the stagecoach used this road at such and such a year. So I
And
know
that
it really
would
did.
that would have come from Sacramento and would be heading up to Portland.
Yeah, and Jacksonville and on up.
Portland wasn't much of a town. I think it was called Stumptown then.
Yeah. But anyway, it really was why it's called Old Stage Road. But anyway, he bought this 15 acres, and it had somebody had planted a little pear orchard on it. The first year, this was funny. My mom and dad waited for all the pears to get ripe. Well, when they get yellow on the tree, that means they're rotten in the middle. They didn't know that. You have to pick pears green. It's the only fruit you pick green. And so they waited, and it was too late for the pears. But anyway, they started raising chickens. They had 1,500 chickens.
Oh my goodness.
And they would butcher like 100 at a time. And my mom would wrap them. My dad would butcher them, and my brother and I'd run them to her on the back porch, and she would clean them out and cut their head and everything off, and wrap them up and put them in this restaurant refrigerator we had on the back porch. And then she would take like 100 to Quality Market. Quality Market's still in existence in Medford up on the east side, but it used to be downtown, down by Main Street, on Main Street.
So that's from grower to
Yeah.
to the
And she would take the cream in at the same time from the cow and let us go to the dime store and pick out some little thing, on Saturday once a
what
month.
dime store was that?
We could either go to Woolworths or Newberry's. They were both on Central in Medford.
Right across the street.
Right across the
that
street.
was always a marvel to me.
We like Woolworths the best. But then they raised rabbits, and they had one cow for milking cow.
So really kind of independent, off the grid.
And
so-
I didn't move the story along here. This is what we looked like then. And
this is Mom and Dad.
yeah, I don't need that one right there. Yeah, that's my mom and dad, and that's my brother Jerry and me and my sister Sharon. She was 6 years younger than me, and she was always a mama's baby. And so she doesn't have any memory of all of this, and we don't have much memory of her either. She was just our dear little sister, but she always stayed close to mom's skirts. That's my mother.
And you were out with the boys doing.
Yes, my brother and the
Climbing
boys across the street, we were doing everything, running through the fields and having a great time.
What about irrigation?
Yeah, and this is me when I was in 4th grade at the old big brick school in Central Point.
I've recently been to that school. My husband went to that brick school
Did he?
when he was, they were traveling between jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went there and to see if I could do a TV show about it. It's a wonderful building.
This is interesting because I went there all the way through grade school, from 3rd grade on up, and I was afraid they were going to tear it down when they did the new school, but instead they made it into the county school board offices, and was really good because they had over by Crater just this little teeny flat top thing that they had to have their offices in. And so one day I was walking in Central Point, and I went by there, and when they very first opened it, and they had built the school along the side, and the one that used to be the high school was over beside it, and it was a flat one before they had Crater. They had that little flat building. I have a story about that too. But anyway, I was walking by it, and I went, I want to see in there so bad. It was so dear to my heart. And so I went creeping in there, and I walked up those stairs, deja vu, the first time I'd been there since 1946. And I went in there, and the lady said, "Can I help you?" And I told her what the deal was, and she said, "Oh, look all around. Be sure you look around." And what they did was they left the old oiled floors, they left the floor, everything the way it was, and the room in all 4 corners like it was. But they made a module in the center for the secretary, and then they took each room in the corners and divided them with dividers for the secretaries, and they didn't tear them apart. I thought that was so nice. I took a picture of this. I had large in there because she wanted to hang it on the wall.
Those school days, they have left you with lots of positive
They have.
memories. What's another one, please?
One time I was at PTA with my mom. After school, they would have PTA and the children go in and sit with their mother in that flat top building that used to be the high school, which they've torn down. And big congregation, big. And I was sitting right in the middle of it with my mother. And we didn't have any school buses, and my mom didn't like my brother and I walking the 3 miles to school and back, especially when my brother was in first grade and it was snowy or whatever, and it was gas rationing, and we only had one car, and my dad had it.
Of course.
Anyway, so she got up in PTA meeting and she said, Mr. Jewett, who was a school superintendent, when they asked for questions, she got up and said, Mr. Jewett, we need school buses. And he said, I'm not in the bus business and I'm not ever going to be. And she said, why? And he said, because I walked to school in the snow when I was a kid, and these children can walk to the school in the snow now. And she said, Mr. Jewett, your mother washed on a washboard, but I bet your wife don't. And everybody just snickered, and he turned red as a beet. He was a little tiny Englishman with a little mustache and tweed clothes, you know, like that. And he was really red. And then she said, okay, tell me what I can do. He said, well, you can go to the courthouse in Medford, and you can get a petition, and you can have it signed, and you will need 1,000 signatures, and you'll never get them. And then he went on to other business. Well, you didn't put my mom down that easily. So afterwards, after the meeting, another lady, Mrs. Stone, came up and said, I'll help you. So my mom went to the courthouse and got the petitions, and they each took them around. And I remember sitting in the car when my mom would stop at all the farms and ranches and get the signatures on the petition. Well, they got their school buses, whether he liked it or not. They got their school buses. And 20-some years later, when our first one was in 6th grade, and he was going to Jewett School, and Mr. Jewett was dead by then, and they'd built a school named after him. I went to a PTA meeting, and Mr. Myers, who is now school superintendent, had said, I went to Portland this weekend to a school superintendent meeting, and they said, Central Point buses go more miles than any other buses in the state of Oregon. And so I went home and called my mom, who lived in Reading then, and said, Mom, guess what you started?
Oh, my.
Wasn't that funny?
Because Central Point School takes in...
Well, at that time, they went, maybe they still do, they went to Tolo, and they went clear out almost to Sam's Valley. They just went everywhere, you know, up all these canyons. They had little tiny schools up these canyons before the war. Right. And then they had closed them all.
Right.
And so Central Point, they had to bring their kids in.
Central Point, I got to visit the school and talk to the principal at the grade school, and he, in the hall there, I met a young woman, and she said, oh yes, I teach signing. I said, signing? She said, yes, for Jackson County, our school is the only one that has deaf school.
Really?
And I hope I'm using the right terms, folks, because and they bus kids in there so that they have a learning privilege too.
Right.
Fantastic. Now,
anyway, and then there was another one. I got to tell you about this. Okay, we had a very, very small, just a few people at church. And we went into Medford. And then when the camp would have an influx, then sometimes we would have twice as many people.
Sure.
And my mom and dad one Sunday invited this WAC, this Women's Army Corps person, to come out for dinner after church. And so she came out. So after we ate dinner, my dad said, would you like to see the farm? And she said, oh, I would love to. So he took her out, and I followed along, I was like that, to see what was going on. And he showed her the chickens and the pigs and the cow and whatever. And he showed her the rabbits. And when he got to the rabbits, well, he took one out of the nest and said, would you like to hold it? And they just had their eyes open. They're so sweet when they're like that, you know. And she's sitting there petting it, and I'm watching her. And she looked at me and she said, honey, never join the Army. Marry a farmer.
Now, is this where your farm is?
Yeah, I found this where they sell postcards, and this was our acreage there. And here, you're looking up at the farm. You can even see the outhouse and the chicken house and whatever. And you can see there. And then this picture is going the other way. My dad was standing down by the pasture. My mom didn't know how to milk a cow. One thing she didn't know how to do. And my dad, when the camp was over, he started doing wigwam burners and Southern Pacific Railroad depots and stuff like this for all the little towns in Oregon. And he was gone during the week, and so he told my mom, you have to learn how to milk the cow. And she struggled and struggled, and she had the sorest muscles. She did it for a whole week, and then he came back. And about 2 days later, well, a friend of his, came over and talked him into selling him the cow. And my mom said, why didn't you do that before I got sore muscles?
Yeah, what a chore. Now the kids are getting a little bigger.
Yeah, that were a
And
little
what did
bigger.
you grow?
They mostly just had pasture, and we had some horses, and we had the cow, and and he would raise some calves on it, and then we had chickens, and we had a big, huge garden.
I was going to say that looks like gardening.
Yeah, we had
to
a
me.
bit of garden.
Now, how is it that you came to be my guest today? I love that story, and I haven't heard the whole thing.
Well, I just watch you every week, and I just love it a lot. And when people tell stories, I think, oh, I could tell one like that, and so I just...
I just got a little note. My husband said you had a call, and Eloise would like to be a TV guest. And I'm going, this is my favorite kind, is because you have something to share, and I don't know where I'd ever would have met you except here at Better Life Television. You're all the way, do you still live on this farm?
No. When I was 12, then my parents moved into town.
And the town is?
Into Medford.
Medford.
My dad's crew remodeled an old horse barn for an estate. It was huge. And they had never used it. It was off of East Main when you get right at the top of the hill in Medford. It's a big estate back in the trees. And down the hill behind it, which is now a half a block from where Hedrick is, but then it was all fields everywhere, there was this big horse barn, and they sold that part of the property, and he took his crew in and made that into a house, big, beautiful home for my parents, and we moved there in '46.
Well, the Wamplers had made the barn from a barn into a gorgeous home with the huge timbers. I can almost imagine.
I had another story, but we probably won't have time. But across the road from this, see, not this one, but this property right over here, up above, there's a big, huge barn. And my brother and I used to have so much fun in that barn with those kids, just wonderful times.
You mean the ropes and the
Everything.
hay bales and the...
Yeah, I don't know if we have time, but I have it written.
You've written poetry. You've written...
Yeah.
Volume. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Where is it?
We love it when people come well prepared with more information than we could cover in 2 or 3 shows.
True. I wonder where it went. Have you ever played in a great big barn? It is a special memory. One of the oldest in the area, and a dirt floor and a weather vane circling on top, stood on our neighbor's farm across the road. The stalls on one side were very large enough for elephants, but they housed workhorses with huge shaggy hoofs and tasseling manes. One side, where the big door slid back, the green John Deere tractor and farm equipment were kept when the day's work was done. The barn smelled of leather and rusty tools. In the fall, the whole barn smelled of sweet, ripe apples, and the apple press would be used, and the juice would pour into round, blackened kegs. A tin cup of the cold juice was a delight to us. On rainy days, we climbed high into the dusty loft and jumped into the scratchy green hay below, or climbed the ladders nailed to the wall in each corner and going up and up 20 feet to look into the pigeon nest at the ugly pin-feathered squabs. The mother pigeons always flew around and around scolding us. Some days we spent hours in the stalls letting our imaginations lead us into acting out stories we had heard about that old barn. In the spring it was thrilling just to perch in the opening of the hay fork, with the hay fork at the very top, and look across the valley. We could see the tiny ribbons of blue canals or rows of orchards which looked like bushes from our tall lookout. The valley had as many greens as an artist's palette, with feathered clouds and resting in the blue. Dropping down to the pillow of hay below was the scariest part, but it was worth it just to see the valley from up so high. That big old square barn with the lean-to on one side and the direction of the wind on the top. We sometimes, my brother and I, never forgot.
And you used a word in there, hay fork?
Mm-hmm.
What's a hay fork?
They had the hay fork. It was like about this big, and it had the tongs that went up like this, and that's what they would let the rope down off the pulley, and it would pick up the hay and dump it out into the wagon.
And all this is fun play place.
Oh, that was fun.
On a dirt floor.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
And that barn has been made into a house now.
Oh, it has. Do you think they know these stories?
You know, I had a picture of that barn that I took when I knew they were going to do that, like when I was an adult. And the person and I had a friend who was a neighbor to that barn, and she knew they were going to change it and make this house. And she wanted me to let that person see what it looked like before they started the construction.
Right.
And so I loaned it to her, and I never got it back.
I understand that story.
But anyway, that was really, really, really fun times.
Well, now, you've not only told the stories, written them down in that form, but before they're typewritten up, I got the feeling that you've put them into these beautiful memory books.
Yeah, I've got 60 years worth. I have a whole cardboard barrel of books.
And what's the reason that?
Because I just love family history. I love to write, and my mother bought me a journal to write in for Christmas when I was 10. And I've done it ever since. Now I usually just write on weekends, like on Sunday I'll write or something like that, or if something's important, but that's all.
But the reason that one keeps a journal,
This?
is just so marvelous.
Yeah.
Will you stay and tell us more stories?
Sure. We didn't talk about my dad yet.
Oh no, your dad. You mean that we've got stories.
About the prisoner of war camp and
come back.
that.
Come back. Thank you very much for tuning in to Better Life TV. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to travel history way back. I love it. And the only way that I can do it is by talking to people like Eloise, who lived those days out in Central Point, or you named a name of a town I'd never even heard of.
San Miguel, California.
No, out by Buncombe, I think you were talking about.
Yeah.
And we're just learning about our community. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have a story you'd like to tell, contact Better Life TV, because I'd love to learn it.